Welcome to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Here are your hosts, Anthony and Melissa.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I am your host, Anthony. Unfortunately, Melissa will not be able to join us tonight. She is very sick. We even tried to push off this recording as long as we could, but she simply can't talk without coughing. So we're just going to jump right to the announcements, and then we're going to get into this crazy, hopefully fun episode. Okay, so before we jump to the episode, I just wanted to take the time to remind you that we are on most of the socials. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X. You can find us on TikTok. You could even find us on Snapchat at Anthony Corelli. All of that information is in the show notes. So please make sure that you take a look at those. We really would like you to become a friend with us on there and just kind of start to look for some of the new exciting things we're going to be doing on those social media platforms, because this podcast is evolving. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that in the upcoming additions to this show. And remember, when I started out to do this podcast, I was just kind of trying to follow God's lead as best I could. And when Melissa joined in, and bought into the vision, we always agreed that we're going to try to reach out to people who are struggling with spiritual warfare and demonic attack. But what we've realized is that comes in a lot more forms than maybe what traditional deliverance ministry would look like. A lot of it's educational, and a lot of it is just teaching people to see this stuff for what it is. And so in the upcoming episodes of this podcast, we're still going to entertain letters and interviews. And anybody who would like to join us on that, you can always find us at anthony@thestruggleseries.com. Send in your letters or your correspondence. You could even record an audio file and send it to us at that email, and we will cut it up and make sure that we can get it on the air and use it in an episode. But we are also going to start using some things we find on social media and throughout the internet in terms of being able to diagnose this stuff for what it is. I'll give you an example. What prompted this is I was watching a episode of Isaiah Saldivar's program on YouTube. And Isaiah Saldivar is somebody that I listen to quite a bit. I'm not saying I agree with this guy 100%, and he wouldn't agree with me 100%, but he is definitely somebody who is into deliverance ministry in a way that is very effective and helps tons and tons of people. His theories and theology are pretty solid to me. Like I said, I wouldn't agree 100% with everything he says, some controversial stuff, but I would say that his heart is genuine and he really tries to help people. Well, I was watching his program one day about a very controversial topic that occurred where a police officer shot a woman who was in the kitchen and was trying to, they say, throw a pot of boiling water on this officer. And so I had seen this video in several different formats, because there was one side that was saying the officer shot the woman unprovoked. And then there was another side that was saying that you can clearly see that she tried to throw the pan of hot water on him right at the end before he shot her. And then I watched even another part that said, even if she threw the water, it wasn't justifiable use of force in that to that capacity. So I was very familiar with this story, but what Isaiah did is he pointed out something that I simply didn't see. And I almost feel like I should have, but being honest, I didn't. And what he did is he showed that the officer became very, very, very agitated when she said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ." And when I saw that his whole demeanor changed, that he became agitated, I saw the entire scenario through a completely different lens. And I know some of you know what I'm talking about. If you do, I encourage you to go to Isaiah Saldivar's page and find that episode. It might enlighten you. But if you aren't into that, just go back and watch the video and see what happens to this man's demeanor when she says that. And so what I decided is to commit to prayer. And I think that, we're going to cover some of those topics. So you're going to see next week that we're going to do some kind of commentary on some things that we see in the in the current times or in the social media realm, and try to get a different perspective on some of these things that maybe most of you, if not a whole lot of you, have seen, but maybe didn't see through this lens. And so we're going to be implementing some of that. That doesn't mean every episode is going to be that, but you're going to see some of those changes. Now, besides the social medias, and make sure you go to our TikTok page as well, because we're going to start putting a lot of this stuff out there. But we are going to talk a little bit about right now the struggle series, and why I'm kind of switching gears here is because I want to make sure that we're clear on some things. When I started this podcast, I was simply author Anthony Corelli. I was known for my books, the struggle series. The first two books were released at the time. We're still working on book 3 actually at the publisher. And so a lot of people that listen to this show found me through that avenue. And some of you have read the books, and some of you simply just joined our page because a lot of us authors support each other on the socials. But when this podcast began to grow, and we're not huge, we're still a small podcast, but when we begin to see more viewers than just our family and friends, when a podcast starts out, it's just your family and friends, and then it kind of grows from there. But we started to get questions about the books, and I've seen a lot of different types of questions, including, criticisms, straight out, called the blasphemer and things like that, because we cover the topic of the paranormal. But these books were written to bridge a gap. If you've noticed, a lot of the movies and the programming that you see about spiritual warfare and demonic possession is done through a Catholic kind of a rituale romano lesson, um, where the priest comes in and does this Roman ritual, and that's how demons are exorcised. But Christians believe in a completely different deliverance ministry structure. And so you don't see a whole lot of that. And I wish Melissa was here, but like as we said in the beginning, she's not feeling well. But her and I did watch this movie Deliverance this weekend, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But these books were written because there wasn't a category called Christian paranormal, and now you're starting to see that there's a lot of people that are kind of putting their programming under that moniker, because we as Christians have to be able to cover these topics and answer these questions from our perspective, our worldview, or our theology, if you will. So that's what these books were written to do. And these books were written back in 2018. All 3 books were written in the period of about a month and a half. And I didn't know if I was going to release them as one story with several, kind of books within a book like Stephen King does, or if I was going to release them separate, and we decided to release them separate. And it takes quite a while at a publisher and editing. My first 2 books were not edited well. So if you ever found copies of those, there's probably some annoyance to some of you true readers out there, but they were kind of rushed out because I was a novice. I didn't know anything about it. I'm somebody who has written quite a bit through my education, in the psychology realm as well as in ministry. But I was writing papers. I wasn't writing books, although I was a reader. I did the best I could. And I think if you've read them, you will notice they've evolved. But what I'm saying is these books have those perspectives. And so we decided a long time ago that could we get these out in a more, I guess, digital format, because there is 2 different groups of people. There are readers, and I'm one of them. I can gobble up a book in a day or 2, unless it's huge, and it might take me 3 or 4 days. But I'm a kind of guy that can go sit at Barnes and Noble and find a small book and read it all the way through in 4 or 5 hours, just sitting in the bookstore, enjoying the smells and the sights and sounds, and then put it back on the shelf and never buy it. But not everybody is like that, especially in today's day and age. People like things in a more digital format. So Melissa and I sat down one day kind of on a whim, and I said, I don't want to go through the whole process of like getting voice actors and trying to do the whole audiobook thing. I'm just going to read them and put them on a podcast. And so that's what we did. And so it didn't take as long as I thought, but it did take quite a bit. And I just read them through, narrated them myself. And so book one and book two are released in their entirety. The Struggle is book one, the Sacrifice is book two. And if you go to the Struggle Series podcast, you'll just see season one, episode one, S1, E1, colon, and then it'll say The Struggle. That's book one. And then chapter one, and it'll have the title of that chapter. And then when you get to book two, it'll say season two, episode one, and go from there. And then now we're in season three, which is book three, The Return. And we're getting a lot of people from Pueblo, Colorado. Some folks out there in Pueblo have kindly posted it to some social media. And so we're finding listeners from there as well. And so if you're somebody who's familiar with Aurora, Colorado, which is where book two was based out of, and everybody's kind of familiar with Aurora nowadays because of the kind of gang controversy coming on in Aurora, but this was kind of a different part of Aurora that these books were written in, but still the same city. And then Pueblo, Colorado is unique in and of itself. So these books are basically following the escapades of a crazy out of the box pastor who, in the beginning of book one, it shows how he kind of evolved by seeing demons as a child and becoming somebody who had to, the hard way, find out about deliverance ministry, and then going out to help people throughout the next, chapters of these books. And in book one, he meets these two detectives because while in the midst of a deliverance ministry session, a child goes missing and detectives get involved and there's suspicions and there's tons of twists and turns. And in book two, these detectives have now become believers and are now part of his team. And I'm not going to give up more than that because when you read these books, much like M. Night Shyamalan, which is one of my kind of heroes in terms of storytelling, I can tell you there's a twist at the end and you probably still won't get them. So I encourage you or challenge you maybe to read those books. If you are a digital format person, you can listen to books one and two and part of book three right now for free on the Struggle Series podcast. And if you're just hungry for all of them, you can join our Patreon at Freedom from the Struggle podcast. And you will notice that at the $5 level, you have access to all three of those books in their entirety. And I will say, lastly, that book three, The Return, my publisher is actually going to do a full narrated and acted out version of The Return. They are in the process of doing that. We're probably still 6-7 months out from that. But if you get kind of a teaser from my voice on there reading these stories, you will have a full, true audiobook of these, within, 6, 7, 8 months. So thanks for letting me cover all of that. Now, let me get back to what I was saying about this movie, Deliverance. And again, I so wish Melissa was here, but she tries to talk and her cough just goes crazy. As a matter of fact, we delayed this recording until the very day that I have to release this on Patreon. So as soon as I'm done talking, I have to get to editing. But Melissa and I watched this movie called Deliverance, The Deliverance. It was on Netflix. And I have to be honest with you, I saw the previews and it looked pretty creepy. And Glenn Close did an amazing job. Just a role that I've never thought I would see her play. But I have to be honest and say that I went through this movie maybe about halfway through before I realized that they were, using the very, very minimal information from the Ammons haunting. And if you're not familiar with Latoya Ammons and her family, we've done an episode, a bonus episode, and I think a primary episode about the Demon House, where Zach Baggins, the famous ghost hunter from Ghost Adventures, bought this home sight unseen when he heard about this haunting and then did his whole documentary on that. But this haunting has so many witnesses and corroborating evidence that it's hard to dispute. Police officers, social workers all watched things that cannot be explained occur around this family, including a social worker watching a young boy walk backwards up a wall in front of doctors and nurses and such. So I will have to say that if you found out that this movie is based on the Ammons haunting, you are probably going to be disappointed unless you prepare yourself, because this movie was not based I would say, at all about the real story. They used the basis of a single mom struggling to raise her kids in a spooky home, and they used the boy walking backwards up the wall, and that's about it. The rest of the story is drastically different from the stories that you would know it to be. So, with that being said, I wouldn't say it's the best movie I ever saw, and I definitely wouldn't say it's the worst. I'd say it's kind of a middle of the road uh, movie. Worth watching, sure. If you have nothing to do and you have Netflix, it's free, so watch it. Now, the movie is one of the first movies that I have seen that approaches the deliverance of these people through Christian ministry, not through Catholicism. Now, again, if you're familiar with the Ammon's haunting, you know that Father Maginot is the one that helped this family, and he is Catholic. So, again, the story is not really accurate to the real story. However, they do use a female Christian minister who tries to help this family. I don't want to give up the ending any more than that because I would encourage you to watch it. But there's some things about that theology I liked. There's some things about the theology I didn't like. But what I can say is the reason I'm taking time to cover it before we get to this Q&A episode is because if you're into kind of understanding what we do here, it might be your introduction into the difference between deliverance ministry and Catholic exorcism. And after that, it's up to you. There's some swearing in there, so it's definitely not a Christian movie by any means. And there's some, kind of sexual innuendos and things like that. So I wouldn't recommend it for kids. But you're grown-ups, you make your choices there. So that is just a little brief discussion on deliverance. I wouldn't call it an overview because I don't want to ruin the story. Now, as I said, as we kind of get towards the middle of this season 3, we wanted to take the time to do a Q&A. And for those of you who write in and ask us questions, we don't really try to ignore anybody unless you are somebody who's just outright like malicious trying to come after us because you're either anti-Christian or you've been wounded by Christianity and you think we remind you of something from your past. I've heard things like that. But we really do try to get back with you as much as we can. Now, in the recent past, I've had some questions, and I hope that you understand that I've sat on some of these, and a couple of you I've actually wrote and said, "Do you mind if I use these on an episode?" So hopefully you're tuning in to listen, because we're going to cover 5 questions that we've kind of selected that we think might help you to understand who we are and what we're about. And so let's jump to those and try to get these questions answered. So, question 1 comes from a woman named Bernice. And she said, "How did you get into deliverance ministry?" Well, that's a kind of a loaded question and maybe a simple question, depending on how I want to answer it. So, I'll do both. If you have not been listening for a while, you will not know this, but if you've been listening for a while, this is going to be ad nauseum here. But when I was a child, I was able to see demons. My first memories were seeing spirits in my home, haunting me, standing by my bed, coming out of my closet almost every night of my life for years and years and years, and just standing watching me. As I got older, the demon began to speak to me. I'm a big advocate of parents listening to their children because although my mother and stepfather did the best they could, it was definitely the 70s where you told your kids to shut up and go to bed and quit being scared of the dark. They did the best they could. I'm not mad at them, but we definitely didn't have support as children, not just myself, but my sister and my brother as well. And so as our life progressed and our family started to spiral out of control, um, by this time I had become a saved Christian and I was becoming familiar with the concept of spiritual warfare. And so I began to see the demonic presence and the familial spirits that haunted my family. Most of it coming from my stepfather, from his kind of drinking, drugging behavior, and the fights and the just the chaos in our family. It was evident to me that this was, demonic attack, spiritual warfare. So began to pray for my family. Unfortunately, that marriage did not last. My mother divorced my stepfather after some craziness, and we'll just leave it at that. And so, I kind of went on my way, understanding what this was. And it's kind of weird because God can use anybody. And when I say that, I mean it literally, because I was a 20-year-old kid out of my own, and I would be partying and drinking and just not living for God at all. Yet somehow I would meet people and we would start talking about God. I would meet people in the most unlikely places like bars or house parties, or, have a bunch of people over at your house and everybody's drinking. And then next thing you know, I'm sitting in the corner talking to somebody about Jesus. So I am not saying that's the way ministry should be done. So if you heard that, Christians, please don't hear that. But I'm just saying God can use anybody. And I can remember just having deep conversations about Jesus and, having to clarify, I'm not living for him right now either, but that doesn't mean he's not real, that type of thing. And every now and then I would just get like, can you pray for me because I'm under spiritual attack? And so I would I would pray for these people, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So when I delved back into the Christian realm after God kind of grabbed a hold of me in my mid 20s and said, "You're living the wrong way," I started to really immerse myself in church. And I had a decent church experience when I first started being a evangelical Christian, but then it spiraled out of control because I was a long-haired heavy metal playing kid, rough around the edges, and the church that I was attending wanted me to be a lot more perfect. And so I was turned off by that, probably more me than them, probably just looking for an excuse to get out of the way. But there was some things they said to me I didn't like. So when I delved back into Christianity, I went in head first and kind of, wasn't so sensitive about it, I guess, and just met some interesting people along the way, taught me several things, um, about about life, I guess, and about the different types of ministry. But when I say life, I mean like real life. Like these were ministers that really tried to help people in the mud, as I like to say. They weren't playing church and then, sending you home. These were the kind of people that would go get in your suffering with you. And so I love that. And just happened to run across a guy that was the deliverance minister of that specific church. And I won't say the name, but I shadowed him and I followed him around. And this guy was crazy radical. Took me to some scary, scary situations. I watched things that, would blow your mind movie wise. But he was fearless, and I couldn't understand it because I still had my foot in the world. And, if you Christians would know what that is, I was trying to live for Christ, but I wasn't, I was still trying to keep some of my sin very, close in my front pocket. But he would take me to places, and these demons would come out and say things to me about things I was doing and things that like nobody should know. And the pastor would say, that's why you got to pray up before you come to these things, because they speak to each other and they know about us. Well, that scared me. I didn't want any part of it really because, I was embarrassed. I mean, imagine you're with a family and they say that one of their family members is possessed and you're going over there and you're just this wide-eyed 20-some-year-old person that's helping a pastor, and all of a sudden the demon starts telling these people your secrets. It's terrifying. It's atrocious. It's like humiliating to the nth degree. So I really kind of tried to shy away from it, but there was that part of me that knew like you have a sight into this spirit realm that a lot of people don't. And through working with this pastor, I was able to discern things that he wasn't. And so he was very instrumental in, his name was Derek. I'll leave it at that. I won't say his last name, but he was very instrumental in teaching me to not be afraid and to understand that he's doing this ministry and he doesn't have this discernment that I do. He just understands who Jesus really is. Well, through just my trying to live in the world and live in the Christian realm, I lost the battle, which you're going to lose every time. I decided to kind of walk away from church again, just because, I wasn't living the way I should have. I wasn't willing to give up some of the things I should. And so I went back out into the world again. Backsliding is what they call it, but it was what it was: drinking, partying, doing stupid things. Got in some touches with the law. And, I wasn't raised that way. I grew up in the hood, but I was always raised to be smarter than that, better than that. But here I was. And so that was the time where I would say that I kind of had to make a decision. And I'm not saying I haven't made huge mistakes since then, but I really feel like, okay, like, you can't live like this. And so that's when God kind of grabbed a hold of me and basically put me on a path that said, you're going to be a minister and a therapist. You're going to teach people how to be healthy and about me, and you're going to get in the mud with people because you understood that concept then, because that's how I designed you. So I went back to school and immersed myself in an education process where I was so open to learning, and God just opened my heart and my mind to all kinds of different concepts. And that's where I began to really delve into who the demons really were. And if you're new to the program, go back and listen to any of the episodes where we talk about Nephilim and angels and demons, and you'll understand the theology of this podcast. But I really immersed myself into that. And God really began to teach me these things at a level that were not really mainstream like they are now. There, you can go out and find, who the Nephilim really are, and are their disembodied spirits, the demons. I was working on this stuff years and years ago because of no other reason than God wanted me to know. And so through the process of, working in, what I would say lay ministry, volunteering tons and tons of my time, becoming a lay pastor because the church wasn't big enough to hire me, and I was still working as a therapist full time, I began to just help people with deliverance ministry on a, way more frequent basis than I ever would imagined. And that's when you realize what God's called you to do. And so, most of my time was spent on the counseling couch or at the pulpit preaching or teaching, adult education in churches about, Christianity and different topics. But on far more occasions that I ever would have dreamed, I would get phone calls, and people would come stumbling in with these demonic entities attached to them, and we would pray for them. And those things become word of mouth. Next thing you know, I'm getting calls from random people. My sister's calling me saying she's at a party with her friend, and some devil worshiper put a spirit on her friend, and I'm going to a park at 3 o'clock in the morning to pray demons out of people. And so it kind of just evolves, and it kind of just happens. Um, I don't believe that you have to be called, ordained deliverance minister to pray demons out of people. I think anybody can, in a situation where a family member or a friend is in need. I think as a Christian, you have what you need. You just study up on the scriptures, do some homework, understand concept of what deliverance is and what it's not. And anybody can pray away a demon. But I think there are certain members of the Christian family who just have maybe a calling and a giftedness to do this, and God will push these people your way. I will say, Bernice, that, you know, there are a lot of times where I've wondered, is this really deliverance, or is this just somebody's crazy? Maybe I can, forward them on to a colleague of mine because I'm not practicing as a therapist right now. And then all of a sudden I'll get a visit from some sort of demonic entity telling me to stay away. And then I know what it is. And then we try to help in that capacity. Now, that question could take me 7 podcasts. So let's move to question 2. And this is one where I like, because I think it's worded in a way that you can kind of read between the lines of what Linda is asking, but I also think she asked it nicely. And so I'm going to try to answer her question truthfully. How do you know you see spirits and it's not delusions? Very good question. A couple of things I will say, and we could make this again 7 different podcasts, but 7 episodes of a series. But Number one, I am a licensed, trained, educated therapist. I've even trained other therapists as an educator. I understand what mental illness is and where delusions come from. I have also received tons of therapy, some voluntarily and some back when I was forced to do it for some trouble I was in. So I've met several different therapists, and I believe in my heart of hearts that I understand what that is. But you also sometimes can't self diagnose. But I have gone through batteries of testing. And even when you're becoming a licensed therapist yourself, you do different types of testing, and you actually are made to see a therapist and made to get mental health evaluations. You also have what's called a supervisor when you're getting your hours and such. That kind of isn't your counselor, but he's more of like a mentor slash counselor, or she. And they really are there to make sure you're healthy enough to do this job, because unfortunately, some people squeak through, and there are a lot of unhealthy people that become therapists, and therapy becomes their own therapy and not for helping others. So there is a lot of screening. So I know I am not diagnosed with any mental illness. I don't use drugs or alcohol. I haven't used alcohol for 27 years. So I have not had any illegal substances or alcohol in my body for no illegal substances wasn't really my thing, but alcohol, 27 years. So I know those delusions aren't coming from some sort of intoxication. But the other way I know that what I see is real, at least some of the things I've seen is real, is because I have been in the presence of several people, different times, who have seen the things I've seen. If you go back and listen to some episodes from my sister, my brother, Melissa, even my co host, and I told a story about how her and I both saw the same spirit while looking at some model homes. The homes you go to when you're looking to buy a home, they have models set up, just a random, inconspicuous place where you wouldn't think you would see anything. We saw something there. So I know I've seen spirits because I see them and somebody else sees them. Now, that's hard for me to prove unless you trust the people that are talking with me. But I think if you really look at today's day and age, there is a lot of video evidence, Linda. And I would say, honestly, it is not unfathomable that 85% of the stuff you see, like on paranormal caught on camera or programs like that, those could be faked. I've seen some crazy things people can do with dressing in a green suit and kind of moving around a house undetected because of green screen technology and things like that, that would look like a ghost moved something, but it didn't. People putting strings on chairs and pulling them across the room. But I would say at a minimum, 10% of the things that you see are real, things that couldn't be faked and couldn't be altered, even with, trick photography or magic. And when you look at those, you have to say all it takes is for one of these things to be real. And then you have to treat this in a completely different fashion. So when people say, I don't believe in ghosts, and then they see a ghost or a spirit, you know, they now become a believer. But if other people didn't see it, right, now that person is now the weirdo to who he used to consider other people weirdos. But all it takes is for one documented piece of evidence that cannot be disputed, and you will find that your whole perspective changes. And if I've seen them and somebody else has seen them and we can't be disputed, then at some point you have to realize these are real. I think maybe a deeper way to answer your question is I have seen demons, and I can tell you what they look like because I don't just see shadow figures. I see, different types of demons, but definitely when I look at like ancient artifacts, especially like ancient Egyptian artifacts where they have like these beings that look sort of reptilian in the face, but they're quite not, and they have kind of like a human body. I have seen those beings, And I saw them before I ever saw any Egyptian artifacts whatsoever. And I can remember having this big, huge book that we had at our home. It was huge. It was probably like 18 inches tall. And it was just a picture book of like mysterious things. I can't even remember what the title of it was, but there was like pictures of the Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot footage, and just a couple pages of stories of how this is Bigfoot. It was just kind of maybe paranormal things. And when I stumbled across this section about these ancient artifacts where it was talking about these Egyptian gods, when I saw one of those figures, and I think if you've looked at this stuff long enough, you know what I'm talking about. I knew immediately that's what I've seen. And so I could point that out to family members, but again, you would have to talk to my family members to verify what I've said. So I think until you have your own experience, Linda, you don't really know, but that's how I know that they're not delusions. Question number 3. This is from Trevor. What is a story you can tell that proves true paranormal? Show some pics. Okay. So if you, Trevor, can go back to, I think it's season 2. You're going to have to test me on this, but episode 8, season 2, episode 8, or episode 6. You'll know it by the interview with Rhonda. And this is just one that you can quickly look at the second you listen to this. When you look at this story, I'll narrate it for you as it's happening. A woman named Rhonda, we're speaking to her. She states that she feels that there's a demonic presence in her garage, but that it won't come in the house because she's a Christian, but for some reason it dwells there. And so we have a great talk during the interview, and I asked her if I could pray for her. And I said, why don't we go out to the garage? Because that's where you're the most terrified. Now, we are having this interview in the middle of the day. It wasn't a stage thing where we set it up at night. And keep in mind, I do not and will not ever put anybody's face on this podcast, because I am somebody who believes that your anonymity is more important than 15 seconds of fame and then 6 years of ridicule by your friends and family and coworkers calling you a kook because you believe in demons. So we don't use anybody's last name, and we definitely don't put their images on the screen. And the only reason I haven't showed the full video is because Rhonda is the primary person in the video, and the 80% of the screen is her face. And even blurring her out isn't going to do this any justice. But long story short, it's in the daytime. We're praying, and she's holding the cell phone in front of her. So she's doing her interview on a cell phone with earbuds in. And as she's pointing it at her face, she's walking around the garage with her eyes closed. Well, as I was praying for her, I was just watching her on the screen. And to be honest, it was getting kind of dizzy because she was moving around so much. And all of a sudden she stopped. And so like in a dead stop, there was a section of the garage rafters above her head. So I took a glimpse at that section of the rafters, and I had just watched that section where she was walking around, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds before. There was nothing there because there was this blue tarp that they must have had something stuck up in the rafters that was wrapped in a blue tarp. But when she turned and stopped, for about 2 seconds, I see this face, this creature, whatever it is, in that section of the rafters. Then she moved. And so we were still praying. I didn't want to say anything because we're in the midst of a prayer. And that's what the demon probably wanted us to do, was to stop praying. So we prayed for her. We finished. Then I told her, hey, I just want to let you know I saw something in your rafters, and I'm going to go back and look at the video. Well, as soon as we start talking about this, her audio cuts out. And of course, we had to edit some of that, but we left a lot of it in so you would know it was authentic. She could hear me, or she couldn't hear me, but I could hear her. Then the thing disconnected. When we reconnected, I was able to get with her and send her some screenshots and show her that this thing was there. And so if you go back to some of our social medias and you can find, especially on Instagram, I think is probably the best way to find it, or on Facebook, just go back to our Freedom from the Struggle podcast pages and go back and look for those images. You'll see the blank spot in the rafters, and you will then see where that face with looks to be glowing eyes is there. Um, it's pretty obvious. Several people have seen this. I have the video. I would never release it, but I can verify it 100% that it's an authentic video. And I want so badly to try to release this thing in its entirety, blurring around his face. But if you understand that the vast majority of this video is her face, I it wouldn't do it justice. Taking the screenshots does it the best. Now, of course, a zillion of you are going to say I fake that. And, Rhonda knows, her boyfriend Howard was there. He knows. Those people in my circle have seen the video. They know. So there is that. Now, in terms of pictures, what I'm going to do for you, Trevor, is I'm going to go out as part of our next episode, and I'm going to try to find some pictures and put it on our socials of things that I would consider authentic. Now, you're asking to show pics of things that I've gone through, and I don't take recording devices when I pray deliverance for people. I do, however, have a couple of pics that I wouldn't also release. And I know this sounds like a cop out, Trevor, but I am honest with you, because these pictures show people and situations, people in situations that even if I blurred out their faces, people could be detected. So what I will tell you instead is a story. So you want to pick, but I'm going to give you a story. So this to me is probably, and if you can go back and also listen to a couple of the episodes we have. We did an episode a little while back on a bonus episode about a situation that occurred within my own home. And so, I maybe I'll cover that too. I'll tell you two stories. Okay. So first story that proves the paranormal is real to me. Okay. So I went to a home to help a young woman who I think was 14 at the time, 15, and her parents, who stated that they were having a paranormal type uh, attack on their family that was literally occurring at the moment. And they called us for help in the moment, not like, can you come out tomorrow? Like, can we get somebody out here? I could hear things in the background that sounded like a like a domestic violence situation was going on. I could hear like pots and pans and breaking in the background. And I just happened to be sitting in my office at the church I was working at. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening, 6:30ish, at that time of year when it's kind of dark at 6:30. So it was kind of dusk. And the person who used to go accompany me to these, um, I won't mention her name. She happened to be in the office and she said, "Let's go." So we jumped in the truck and we were praying on the way there because, you always want to pray up for these things, but it was kind of spur of the moment. Well, when I walked in the house, what I noticed right off the bat as I looked up the stairs onto this landing. So it's a big home in a very kind of affluent suburban area, Highlands Ranch, Colorado. I'll say it. I'll say that. We looked up this landing. So you walked up the stairs. There was a landing that kind of divided the upstairs into two sections. I saw a shadow that was leaned over the rail and then in like a blink of an eye just kind of darted to our left. And so what I said was, "You have a demon here." And they were in the I can remember the father. He said, "No blank, Sherlock." And so I couldn't even be mad at him because they were so agitated. Well, when I walked around the corner, The kitchen was in complete shambles, disarray, plates broken, uh, pots and pans, like I said, on the floor. And the sliding glass door looked as if somebody had ran into it and kind of knocked it off the track. So the window wasn't broken, but the door was knocked off the track, like it had jumped the track. And so it was kind of half open and half closed. And I said, what happened here? And they said, it just decided to go crazy. Um, and so the young lady is sitting on the couch, very catatonic. And she says to me, as she turns her head, she says to me, "Hello, Pastor. Tell me about the new baby." And I said, "What new baby?" She said, "The new baby you haven't told your kids about yet." And at the time, I had 3 kids, was waiting on the fourth. But nobody knew because you're in that season where you're not supposed to tell anybody for a few weeks in case the pregnancy doesn't take. And so I said to myself, whoa, okay, well, this is real. I didn't need any more, but that's chilling enough, let's say. So as my assistant and I go to sit next to her on the couch, she said, "Don't sit there." And she said this to my assistant because it is sitting there. And so as my assistant went to sit down, she immediately shot back up and she said, "What the blank was that?" And I kid you not, on the back of her shirt was a handprint with claws on the end. Now, do I think demons have claws? Do they all have claws? I don't know. Do they represent themselves to have claws so we're scared of them? I don't know. But this handprint had a claw that looked like it was wet. So, like if somebody had a dry shirt on and you had a wet hand and you put it on the back of their shirt. And so she came and sat next to me and she was, shook. This is not a woman, by the way, that swears profusely. It was that terrifying that that's what came out of her mouth. And I don't think God punished her that day for that. I think anybody would have had that reaction. So we began to get a history from the family. And as the family was giving the history, it turns out that this young lady was very much 100% immersed herself into witchcraft. She deemed herself a witch. She was mocking her parents' Christianity. I never saw her at church, so they never really made her go, but I did know the family by face, not by name. And they, kind of explained that this had gotten completely and utterly out of control. So we went into her room and she had a crystal ball. And when you've studied this stuff long enough, you realize these things aren't as mundane as we think they are. We associate a crystal ball with like a medium or like one of those tarot card places where you go and get your fortune told and things like that. But this was real. And when I came out of the bedroom with it, she was still sitting on the couch, the young lady, and she went into a full-fledged rage. And her parents were holding her down. And so I prayed over the crystal ball and basically said, any spirits you're condemned here, go back to the abyss and don't come back. Remember, the demons didn't want to go into the abyss when Jesus was confronting them in the cemetery. They asked to go into pigs instead. So that's where you want to send them, in my opinion. Now, what maybe takes this a step farther in terms of your question that proves the paranormal, this young lady then turned to her father and described in detail the affair that he had 20 years ago with a young lady when he first got married. So this was before they had their first child. If I remember correctly, there was just 2 children, but I could be wrong with that. But the one child was a little bit older than this young lady. So, and she told him that he had an illegitimate son from that affair. She told him that the name of this person, of this young man who was his son, and that when she met him, he would look just like him. Now, this was well before Ancestry.com or 23andMe. This was well before that. And so, of course, the mother became upset and this thing began to kind of take back control. So we prayed. Unfortunately, the young lady wasn't willing to become a Christian. And for those of you who know the theology, we could pray away this demon in the short term. But if she's not willing to accept Jesus into her life, this is probably going to make it worse for her and the family. And frankly, it opens us up as deliverance ministers to attacks and things like that, because we are not exorcising a demon. Jesus is intervening on behalf of a believer who wants to be delivered. And so if this person doesn't want to be delivered, we're kind of wasting our time. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's the reality. If you understand these things, if I say demon, go away, fine, it's going to come back angry when I'm gone. And so we don't really want to get into that. It really is not the right time until that person has come to grips with the fact that they need to be saved or their ultimate demise is evident. Then they can cry out to Jesus. Then we can help. So long story short, we were able to just kind of pray for calm in the family. It wasn't very long after that that the young lady was arrested because she and her friend had went on some sort of drug-induced crime spree where they, I guess, stole some things and crashed a car, things like that. And so the young lady went to juvenile jail, and the father, from his curiosity, he called me. This was probably a month later. He had called me to tell me about the daughter, and we just continued to pray for her. But he said, so this was about 2 weeks after the incident. Then about 2 weeks after that, he called me and said that he had reached out to this person he had an affair with and found out that he had a son. Now, I never heard from them again because they did move out of state. They took the young lady with them when she got out of jail to try to get her out of the environment. And they kind of faded into oblivion, stopped returning my calls and things like that. So this is not a happy ending story. But Trevor, I would just want to let you know that that can't be made up. There was no way that the young lady had done her ancestry and then found out she had a brother from her dad's side like they could easily today. These things did not exist then. And so I would say this is maybe the very early 2000s. So there was no way for them to know. And so with the things we saw there and the things that we saw, that the father admitted afterwards, this was huge. This is 100% proof of the paranormal, as much as I can give it to you without you being there yourself. Now, Trevor, I said I'd kind of tease another story. And if you haven't heard this story because you haven't listened on the Patreon episode or otherwise, I did an episode about buying a home and me not being present when the home was bought. And through some kind of a vision that I had, I was able to see that the previous residents had left, or the husband had died and the wife left a conjuring mirror with some occult books above a closet that was very high in the air that you couldn't see. But when my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time, climbed up the ladder that she had set up in the bedroom, she found this conjuring mirror. And then once that mirror was removed from the house, there was no longer any paranormal issues there. So that's something that could be proven because there are, I don't know, no less than a dozen people that can verify that that story is true. So beyond that, I would just ask that just kind of be in tune, Trevor. We're going to put some photos out and some videos. So next week's episode might help you get some answers to that question. If your question was truly authentic, my only thing I could tell you is just become a skeptic, but become an optimistic skeptic. And if you're watching some of these paranormal, video shows, which ones capture your heart and say, man, that would be hard to fake. Those are probably the ones you need to go down that avenue. if you're looking for truth of the if you're looking for proof of the paranormal, excuse me. Let's jump to question 4. This is from Virginia. Have you ever prayed for someone and it didn't work? Well, Virginia, if you're listening, and you're one of the folks that I reached out to and said, we're going to be covering your question on this episode. I think the previous story there would be one truth of that. But the fact of the matter is, Virginia, I have prayed for people that it didn't work. And there are reasons for that. And the reasons are kind of hard to swallow. And so this will become a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. Demons have to have permission to come into your life. God protects us because he is the God of the universe and these things bow to him. The Bible says even the demons believe in Jesus and they tremble at his name. So the very name of Jesus literally caused these beings to tremble. So God is in control. So when Jesus, died on the cross, he gave dominion back to us if we choose to accept it, because Satan had dominion at the fall. Now, why is this complicated? Because demons have to gain permission to come into your life, and we grant them that. Sometimes we know it. A lot of times we don't know it because of their subtle ploys. We are still ultimately accountable for our actions and our behaviors, and definitely will pay the price for any laws we break and things like that. But demons will influence us for sure. I am never somebody who blames demons for people's behavior, because even if a demon truly took over your life, you've given them permission. But it's not one permission that usually gets us in. It's usually a series of permissions. And so in order to receive deliverance, you have to be willing to repent and revoke these permissions. Now, let me get a little hypothetical here. So let's say, for example, I am somebody who has a demonic entity. I'm a 40-year-old man, hypothetically. I'm older than that, but hypothetically, and now have a demon that is attached to me. And this demon is attached to me through sexual behaviors. So some sexual encounters with, where I've given soul ties. I have soul ties with people. I have, you know, entertained a ton of pornography. I've participated in very illicit sexual behaviors because the pornography viewing has caused me to lose, sensitivity to normal sexual contact. So I've done things that I couldn't mention here without blushing. And I realized that on one of these sexual soul tie encounters, I encountered somebody who's a witch, and she, because I broke up with her, put a curse on me. So now let's say I'm in the midst of this deliverance, and the pastor, the deliverance minister, is asking me to revoke these permissions. So I revoke these permissions. I rebuke any spirits who've attached to me through sexual contact. I repent of my sexual sin, blah, 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 blah. And I repent from my viewing of pornography. But in that moment, I say to myself, I'm not going to stop watching pornography, but I'm going to keep going through with this. So the demon may be at bay, but how do you think that demon's going to come back? It's going to come back full force, and it's going to be worse than it was before, because I haven't renounced those things that open doors in the first place. And that's just a hypothetical. I'm not trying to pick on anybody who that is your particular struggle, but you can understand that that's how easy this really is. And so, Virginia, if you haven't been a longtime listener, and we didn't talk about that in our correspondence, I have discussed the fact that I will not pray for people who are not willing to accept Jesus into their lives. Because, as we just talked about earlier, it's really going to probably make it worse. And deliverance doesn't come through me. I'm not so cool and great and powerful that demons see my name and tremble. That's not the case. They probably know me if I've picked fights with them before, but they are definitely not afraid of me in and of myself, because I'm flawed, but they are afraid of the name of Jesus. So when I pray for people and my teams throughout my career as a vocational minister, we would pray in the name of Jesus because that's where the power is. But if the person is not willing to renounce the things that open the doors in the first place, then this will not work. So not only have I prayed for people and it didn't work, I have prayed for people that were not willing to be Christians and they got worse. Excuse me. So over the course of time, I just simply stopped doing that. So, in order for it to work, Virginia, if that's really what you're asking, you have to be willing to submit yourself to Jesus. And if you are not a Christian, but you're willing to be one at the time of deliverance, you can have deliverance. If you were a Christian and you're willing to look at yourself in a very introspective and truthful manner, you can find deliverance. But if you're not willing to give up the things that let it in, you're not going to get deliverance. Now, I will say this, and this is maybe a relief to some people and maybe tick some of you off at the same time. But what is an open door for one person isn't an open door for another. So let me give you an example. Some people can go out and have a glass of wine and maybe even get a little tipsy and then go home and have no problems. So, alcohol in and of itself is not a doorway for the demonic to enter that person's life. But that very same alcohol, ETOH, chemical compound, can get in another person and open that person up to several spirits and several consequences and a complete destruction of their life. So when you're renouncing things, what really happens in a person is they start weighing whether they think that that thing is the problem. But if it popped in your head as a potential for a problem, it's probably the problem. So if I'm praying for somebody and I say, you have a spirit of alcohol, and they know that they've had 3 glasses of wine over the last 3 years, they know that I'm not telling the truth. But if I say a spirit of alcohol has infiltrated your life and you start saying, well, I only have 5 drinks a day, you see the difference? And so whatever permission you gave has to be renounced. And if you start splitting hairs on things that you should know one way or the other about, that's probably the thing that the demon has the biggest hold on, if that makes sense. Let's get to question 5. This is from Wendell. Is it possible for a minister to be negatively affected by the demons you prayed away? Unfortunately, Wendell, yes. And this is where some of my, I guess, Christian deliverance ministry colleagues may disagree with me, depending on who they are. I don't think most of them would, but yes, we are negatively affected quite a bit. To kind of branch off on Virginia's question earlier, there was a young man that I was praying for, and I've mentioned this before, who was struggling, but he wasn't willing to give up his lifestyle. He did accept Jesus, and I believe that his deliverance will come slower because God and him are wrestling. However, I simply stopped taking this person's phone calls because every time he would call with a demonic attack, and this would be middle of the night, I wouldn't answer because I'd be busy. He'd call 5 or 6 times in a row. My family would be attacked. And why is that? Because we were the focus of these demons' rage because we would come and rebuke them. They would go back to him. And then because of his refusal to repent of these things, they thought it, I guess, sport to come and scare my family and so on and so forth. Now, we would pray them away. We didn't have any attachments from these things. These are things that would just be negative. Like we'd be watching TV and doors would start slamming in our house, and we knew what it was, and we'd pray them right away. But there's an example that, we would have to pray. We'd have to spend 30 minutes of our day, praying for protection over our family for something that wasn't our demons. And so I simply stopped answering his phone calls. And to people who are on the outside, you might think that that sounds harsh or rude or even disrespectful. But the reality of it is don't call a deliverance minister to help you if you're not willing to give your life over to Jesus and rebuke and repent from the things that got you there in the first place. Another way I would answer that question, Wendell, is simply that I have received on countless occasions visits from demons who verbally, fearfully have tried to warn me away from helping certain people who they were very, very attached to. And these are some of the extreme cases that I've had. So it's almost like if I feel like I get a visit from a demon, then the case is going to be pretty severe. Those of you who do deliverance ministry, if you're listening to this, you know what I'm talking about, that you have had little visits or little episodes, and those could come in many different fashions where you kind of know this one's going to be a little different. I could remember preaching from the pulpit and seeing somebody in the crowd, in the denomination we were in. We didn't have pews; we had just regular chairs. But we're seeing somebody in the service, and a demon just whispering in my ear as I'm preaching a sermon, "Leave that one alone." And kind of got me off my focus, and I had to kind of regain my focus, go back to my notes. I'm one of those preachers that likes to walk around. I'm not really tied to my notes, but I had to go back. I can remember it's kind of embarrassing, but I knew who that person was by just my eyes caught them, and the demon told me not to mess with them. And so ended up talking to this person after the service and tried to help them, and we'll leave that story alone there. But yes, they can affect us in negative ways. And any Christian should understand this. Demons at any point can affect you. Now, let's address kind of an elephant in the room. And maybe, Wendell, this is kind of where you're coming from. I don't want to assume, but maybe. There are a lot of Christians that have never had paranormal encounters. And so they look at people like me as either demonized myself or that I'm doing something wrong because they haven't. And I would politely tell you that that is probably a very dangerous perspective to have. The demons are probably simply messing with you in a way that is a lot more subtle. And they're coming after me in a way that gets me off of my square fearfully or shockingly, whatever the case may be. Or they simply recognize that I am somebody who is willing to go get in the mud with people, as I've said several times in this episode. But if a pastor is telling you he's never had any demonic encounters, he doesn't believe that demons are real in the sense that they come after us like they were in the first century in the disciples' days, I get real leery of that, because you are probably being influenced in a way that is much more subtle. One of the ways that I think people are drastically influenced by demons that don't recognize it is with the sin of self-righteousness. This demon is telling you how great you are, how smart you are, how much more educated you are than these other pastors, how your Bible college or your seminary taught you better, how your understanding of the scriptures is far more intricate than theirs, that they're simpletons, that people need to come to you for the knowledge, that you understand the Bible better than most. That sin of self-righteousness is what got Jesus crucified. Because keep in mind, in the Bible, the people who should have known the scriptures better than anybody and should have known the Messiah that was predicted in those scriptures watched him walk onto the scene, and instead of seeing clearly what was in their face, they killed him because he challenged their self-righteousness. Remember, he told them, "You're like whitewashed tombs. You're pretty on the outside, but you're nothing but dead bones on the inside." He quoted prophecies about the Messiah to them, and they considered it blasphemy when he was right in their face. And so any pastor who says that they haven't had demonic influence is probably just not somebody who has had outright overt demonic influence or demonic negative influence in their life. But any pastor worth his salt will tell you they've been attacked. They have been physically attacked. They have seen things. They've been with people that they're ministering to in their church, and they've seen the demons on people. They've seen the evil people in people. They've had a family member brought to their church who had reactions to sermons and so on and so forth. And so, yes, we are negatively affected because I believe it's like the Bible says, when the Bible talks about this group of people that was trying to cast out demons, and the demon said, "Well, I don't know you. I know who Paul is and I know who Jesus is, but I don't know you. And the demon whooped up on him. Well, that tells you that the demons are aware of who's effective and who's not. And any pastor who's preaching the gospel and leading people to Jesus and who is helping the sick and the needy and the homeless and really ministering to people Matthew 25 style has been attacked. I guarantee it. And so hopefully that answers that question. Now, our time is getting long, and so I want to just kind of wrap up with here. We love these questions because we're not afraid to answer them. I didn't go into a lot of Bible today, just, giving you stories. So, I'll encourage you to look up those scriptures on your own because I wanted to answer these questions from a real raw perspective. And none of these were truly theological in nature. So I didn't want to take them there. I wanted to just be a real person answering these questions to you. If you feel that you're struggling with paranormal activity, but you don't know who to ask for help, reach out to us. If we can't provide you the help, we're not heroes here. We don't wear capes and come swooping in. We'll guide you to the people who can help you. You might be on a completely different side of the country, and we might be able to get you some resources that you need. And we can, basically, try to find the right theology, the right people who are into deliverance ministry in your area, or simply just try to help you find a good Bible believing church that you can start attending to and ask your questions in a more personable manner with a preacher or a pastor who is local that can be more available to you. But don't hesitate to reach out to us. Ask more questions. If any of you who written us have now further questions, reach back out. We'll get more personal with you and kind of dig in a little deeper. And if you're somebody who has a paranormal experience of your own that you feel can help answer these questions for these 5 folks, write to us or get with us, and we can try to help you get that information to them as well as maybe put it on the air to help other people who have these same questions. So I hope that helps. Again, I just want to remind you that next week's episode is going to look a little different. Hopefully we have some fun with it and try to give a little more educational background to some of the correspondence and videos that you can find on the internet. And so I would be prepared to next week be able to kind of look up some of these. We're going to give, credit where credit is due to help you find the original videos that we're going to cover. And you can look them up yourself as you're watching the podcast or after or whatever. But we're going to find a couple of stories and a couple of videos. We're going to go over those here. So we kind of look forward to that, seeing if you enjoy that format. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Melissa misses you. She wishes she could have been here, but she simply can't say a word without coughing. And so we just decided to go solo today, but she does miss you. She will be back next week. We want to remind you that this program is copyright the Struggle Series LLC. And we always like to give a shout out to Todd Kozinka, our amazing voiceover guy. If you are interested in having a voiceover of your own, you could find him on Fiverr at Todd Kozinka Voiceovers. He is easy to work with. I highly recommend him. Put our music together as well. Give him a view. And if you're looking for that kind of work, find him. And I trust you will have a great experience. Thanks again for joining us on the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you next time.